Hi everyone, it's Craig and Richard here, and this is week 5 feedback video. And as you'll notice, if you spot the difference, Richard has gone back to his old hairdo.
Yes, and I'm back in the country, and we're outside. It's a beautiful, I think, 30 degrees all week this week. It's been amazing.
Yeah. So we're out in the elements, so you might hear some birds, maybe the occasional drill. But this is really an exercise in dealing with distractor influence.
That's
so try
right.
and focus on what we're saying.
Monash University, Clayton campus.
It's out in the natural elements. So a very interesting week, important topic, relationships, communication, and so some fantastic discussion this week as well. And thank you too for Sherelle pitching in last week too. I think a lot of positive feedback to her. One of the things which is great that people are noticing is how much mental rehearsing there is that goes on in the mind, the not actually listening, noticing that we're already rehearsing what we're going to say next. And it's a very common thing to actually, it goes on, and oftentimes we don't even realize that we're doing it, but people are bringing that to awareness. And if we notice that default thinking and rehearsing and so on, we can put it to one side and re-engage with what the person's saying. So a lot of learners have been noting that.
Particularly some of our introverted learners have said that they notice themselves doing that a lot. Yes, and making them quite anxious, sort of waiting for their turn to speak, but thinking about what they're going to say and noticing the anxiety start to ratchet up, whereas a lot of people have noticed that if they just actually drop all of that and start to listen, then they don't feel anxious and they feel more engaged.
Yeah, I remember one paper was talking about default mental activity and describing it as being all about the multi-faceted self, this sort of inward turning, sort of self-conscious preoccupation.
So thinking about ourselves, basically.
That's right. And that means, of course, that we're not paying attention to who is with us or what's going on around us. And so it's very good to notice that and just to leave that to one side. And from a mindfulness perspective, both from the point of view of effective communication and also stress, is to unhook from that and to engage with the listening, the looking at the person who's in front of us. So there's been plenty of discussion about that and the parallel conversation rather than the connected conversation. And mind you, in communication, there's a word unity in the middle. Communication. It's about unity. Two people connecting as one.
And com being together as well, so togetherness.
That's right. It's not about two people having conversations in their own head, because that's not communication.
Which is often what's happening, isn't it?
That's more like a competition.
Yeah.
Richard, so in terms of... you're mentioning about introverts as well before, but about mentally rehearsing and there was more discussion about how to maybe get beyond that, and how when somebody's not listening to us, are there any strategies to help them with that if you actually notice
when we start to notice, and that's the thing, isn't it? As we become more mindful of our own habits, we really do often start to notice other people's unmindfulness. And of course, once we start to notice that other people aren't really listening, but they're waiting to sort of mentally rehearsing what they're going to say next. Yeah, that's a difficult one, I find. I think a pretty good strategy is just to pause, just to stop talking. That can sometimes be good. If you get a sense someone's not listening to you, just stop talking and see if they notice.
Yes. I've heard a number of times parents say that a child was talking and kind of not really listening, and a young child, in all innocence, comes up and grabs the parent by the cheeks and just points their face towards them. You're not listening to me. And I think, not that we would necessarily do that with
grab someone's face. Children can get away with that, yeah.
But, I think to sort of say, to actually stop. Because if we're in the moment, we'll notice that. And to actually stop and not keep talking while somebody's not listening, but just to engage their attention, or maybe to say, oh, look, if you want to have the conversation later on, perhaps we can. But,
and also to model effective listening and speaking, to really be present when we're talking to other people. They'll just start to pick up on that, and it will start to, I think, rub off on them, hopefully.
Yeah. Incessant talkers, what's the mindful thing to do there? That's a pretty challenging topic. Like, it may be we just sit and listen and just feel calm and relaxed and able to do that. It may also be sometimes we need to say and just politely excuse ourselves and say, well, look, perhaps I need to move on to something else, and not necessarily to expect that sitting there for the next 6 hours is going to be the mindful thing to do.
So just to let them talk and talk and talk, that's not necessarily being mindful, is it? That's because usually we disconnect anyway, but just to actually, maybe point that out to them or continue it later on.
Oh, excuse me, I need to just move on and get on with something else perhaps.
Thanks, Rowan. We've now been shaded by one of our team. But there's a whole team behind this course. It's not just you and me, Craig, as people are noticing. Yeah. And so, Craig, some of our learners are talking about when we're talking to people, how do we listen to people we find boring? What's happening there? How do you listen mindfully? And I think that word boring is actually pretty interesting to sort of look into a little bit, because if we're listening to somebody and they're talking and we're sort of sitting there thinking, this is really boring, are we actually listening to them? Or are we listening to all of our judgments and evaluations about the person?
And not just in relation to communication, but all sorts of things. There's a dialogue, I'm bored, which means we're not actually really engaging with the person or situation.
Yeah.
But sometimes it could be appropriate to, when we do need to get on with other things, to just sort of say, politely excuse ourselves and to get on with the things we need to do. Finishing people's sentences was something else people noticed, and how easy it is to sort of be running ahead and make an assumption about what the person's going to say, and it's often a sign of impatience, getting ahead, making assumptions, not really listening, not in step with the person, and it's a good habit to sort of let go of. And who knows, maybe in some relationships somebody's forgotten how to finish a sentence because they haven't been able to do it for years. Which could be another issue as well. Pausing in conversations was something that it came up.
Some of our learners started to just naturally discover that for themselves, and it's very important, because there really is an automatic pilot or a sort of a default mode to talking where we just, as we've said already, we don't really listen and we just talk and get on that sort of that train of talking, and just to pause for a second, just to put a momentary pause in the conversation just creates a sense of openness, lets us just sort of get out of that track and actually maybe think consciously and mindfully about what we want to say. So very, very useful.
Yeah, and it's like the ability to tap that brake pedal. And in therapeutic situations, providing that space in a therapeutic setting, say a psychologist or somebody's talking to a doctor or another counsellor, it's often in that pause that really allows a person to go a little bit deeper, to be a little bit more reflective about what they're saying, to maybe come up with something that it wouldn't come up unless there was that space.
Yes.
There's something very therapeutic about that.
Craig, compassion and vicarious stress, some of our learners were asking about.
Yeah, it's challenging to not get caught in the distress of the people we care about in all sorts of ways. It had come up a lot, parents, and particularly for mothers as well. Some women were saying, my children are distressed. That's when I really get caught in the distress. There are a number of mentioning that, and it can happen to anybody. But this, and what was noted was that when caught up in somebody else's distress or the child's distress, much less able to be helpful, to be objective. And that's one of the things to note. We're just not cutting off from somebody's distress, but when we're distressed by it, often our own stress centers are firing off and we overreact, or we don't know how to respond, and it doesn't help us, and it certainly doesn't help the other person.
No. And that can actually be very helpful. One of our learners was talking about having a friend in palliative care, and I'm sure that's probably a pretty common experience. And feeling like they wanted to be there for them, and worried that maybe mindfulness would mean not sort of being there, not being present, or not feeling their pain. And I think that there's a big difference, isn't there, between empathy in a mindful sense and getting caught up in the emotion.
Yes.
On one hand, if we're mindfully empathic or compassionate, we're very much aware of what someone's feeling and experiencing, and we can be very connected with them, but without identifying with those thoughts and those feelings and getting caught in that. So we avoid the vicarious stress or the vicarious trauma, but at the same time can actually be very present for people.
And that ability to be a calm and open presence with the person who's in distress can be therapeutic in itself. It can help a person who might be very caught up to sort of be able to settle enough to get a more objective look at what they're dealing with, or to be more able to be at peace with something that is not able to be changed. And so it's that calming, mindful presence with somebody can be very helpful for the other person, just by the natural effect of being in that person's presence.
Yes.
There's been a lot of discussion this week too, Richard, about empathy and compassion, which is more helpful, and so on. You got some thoughts about that, and it's a hot topic in the literature as well.
It is. People sometimes talk about compassion fatigue, in medical professionals or other caring professionals and carers and that kind of thing. What a lot of the literature's finding is that when we're empathic, when we feel somebody else's suffering and discomfort and do that in an unmindful way, we experience what's called empathic resonance. So basically the mirror neurons in the brain start to fire up and we very literally feel at least part of what that person's feeling. But of course, as we just said, to do that in a more mindful way, to not get caught up in the feeling, but to actually just, to be aware of it and to feel it partly, but not to get identified with it is a very helpful step. But also, the compassion literature is also saying that if we then focus on the wish that this other person, be free from suffering, maybe we can do something to help them, or maybe we just, bring presence to them, or even just wish that they be happy and free from suffering. That actually activates different parts of the brain, and what that shows is, what the research there shows is that we then don't experience that same kind of fatigue. So maybe it's actually empathy fatigue that people experience, whereas compassion can be a very helpful way of responding to that.
It's true compassion. I think one of the things, and it's been mentioned previously, that the ability when we're sitting down practicing meditation to be in the presence of our own distress. Because sit down meditation is not always going to be easy. Sometimes frustration, fear, anger and so on, build up from the day or the week. And if we can learn to be present to that in a compassionate, non-reactive way, but still open to the fact that it's there, when we do that with ourselves, it makes it easier to be in the presence of somebody else who's experiencing those things without getting caught up in it.
Definitely.
Or reactive to it.
Yeah.
And that not getting caught up or reactive helps us to respond if we need to, or just to be at peace with the situation if we need to, and to be able to tell that's which is more appropriate in a given circumstance.
Yeah. But what about when people behave badly, Craig? That's what some of our learners said. How do we be compassionate and mindful when others are sort of annoying us?
What do you mean, mindfully raise a fist or something? Yeah, no, it's a challenge. I mean, that's raising the bar in terms of being mindful. I don't think that being compassionate necessarily means tolerating bad behaviour.
No, it shouldn't.
No, or a bully. And research has shown that very often bullies are as depressed, if not more depressed, than the people they're bullying.
And if we allow that to continue, they're creating more suffering for themselves, more difficulties for themselves. That's not compassion at all.
No, people don't treat others badly because they're mindful and happy and whole within themselves. It's because of all sorts of unconscious, sometimes conscious, but more often unconscious angst and so on. So people are behaving badly to others because of their own issues and so on. And of course, it's easy to take on those issues, if we're subject to that. So it certainly doesn't mean just putting up with it. There may be something that needs to be said, but to do it in a way, but to just remember at the same time for that to come from a compassionate place, to actually see a layer or two deeper and the pain underneath the person's, bad behaviour.
Yes.
I can remember that grandmother. Once my mother told this to myself when I was much older, but she said, my grandmother once said to her, when your children are the least lovable, they need love the most.
That's very true, isn't it?
I'm very thankful that my grandmother said that to
Sounds
my
like
mother.
a wise woman. Had that mindfulness gene that you've inherited, right?
Well, I don't know, because I certainly tested it out a few times. And so, sometimes firm action might need to be taken, but we can do that even compassionately with
presence, with mindfulness,
and the desire for that person to be free of their unhelpful traits and so on.
Yeah. It's normal for people to feel strong emotions. That's something else that came up, grief and sadness and that kind of thing. And mindfulness is not about becoming a robot and not feeling emotion. It's anything but that. It's about feeling things more deeply and being even more aware of what's really going on for us. But to experience that in a way where we don't get caught in the story of it. We don't react to it. We don't get caught up in it. We can just allow it to be there when it's there and allow it to not be there when it passes. And that can actually be a very helpful thing when we're grieving or experiencing strong emotions.
Yes. For many, it's sort of like, if I practice mindfulness, then I won't feel these uncomfortable things. When if it's natural to feel them, then just to feel them, as you said, with awareness. But to recognise at the same time that it's transitory. And some things hang around for a short time, some things for a long time, but it is transitory, and just to be present to it as a process. When we do get caught up with it, we then often add layer upon layer of rumination on top of it, and we deepen it, and then we very often, of course, prolong the very thing that we're wanting to escape from. But it certainly doesn't mean not being aware. And sharing joy is something that came up as well.
On the other side of the coin.
Yeah. But again, sharing the pleasurable things in life, but without being caught up in those too, because that can lead to its own problems as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And just quickly, the meditation, longer meditation, 10 minutes. Some people found they were dealing with sleepiness or agitation, and these are just normal things. I mean, it's great to be able to sit a little bit longer and start to notice this stuff. So just working with that, normal, very normal experience. I mean, if you're falling asleep meditating, half open the eyes, sit up a bit straighter. If you're agitated, just practicing being with that agitation, very important thing to do.
Yeah. And taking off the trainer wheels. There's been, you can practice without the guidance.
Yes. Well, ultimately, we'd like all the learners in this course to become independent. I mean, as we've noted a number of times, our learners do repeat the course over and over again, which is great because that learning deepens every time and they support one another each time. But also to become independent and not need a recording to meditate is a very useful thing. So perhaps just to start experimenting with sometimes using the recording, sometimes not. Just set a timer on the phone and just see how that goes.
Yeah, and I think that we get the attention bit, back to the breath or back to the body. Fair enough. But what often people forget to take out of the guided practice into their own practice is the attitude. Because hopefully the person guiding the practice is doing that in a compassionate, non-reactive way, just noticing, just coming back. Whereas when we try to practice with ourselves, we start getting angry and harsh with ourselves as the mind goes off. So we need to take that gentleness into the practice. Yeah. It's very important. Just perhaps one of the last things to mention, visualization came up a bit. And is that the same as mindfulness? Well, not really. Mind you can use your attention to focus on a mental image, to mentally rehearse something, and that can be helpful and so on. But in terms of going off into an artificial place as a safe place, mindfulness perhaps is more about bringing us into this place and learning to be safe.
And learning that this can be safe.
Learning to be connected in this place now. And in times of challenge and danger, I saw a little while back the film Sully about pilot who, recreation of real events, landed a plane that had lost all its engine power when it was 3,000 feet over Manhattan.
Hopefully he was being mindful, not sort of going to his safe place while that plane was coming.
That's right. How would you feel if you're sitting there and say, "Oh, excuse me, we've got bird strike, we've got no engine power"?
I think that's Sully now, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. He's buzzing us now. And to sort of say, "Oh, look, I'm going to my happy place in my mind, I suggest you do too." You'd say, "Have you got a mindful pilot up there who could just pay attention and try and land this plane in the East River?" And so being mindful in challenging circumstances is actually far more helpful than going off into some visualization that removes us. So thanks again. It's been another great week of mindfulness practice, and plenty of good things to explore in this final week coming up as well. So we'll look forward to seeing you next week for the final feedback video, and between now and then, have a mindful week.